Hey, Helen here, your host. Great to have you along for the second season of The Beautiful Side of Grief, where we continue to hear from people from all walks of life who have faced or have been involved with heart-wrenching loss and who have come out the other side with so many positives to share with others. I know this may seem like an impossibility for you right here, right now, to be in that space. And believe me, I understand. I lost my own gorgeous 18-year-old daughter and only child in a car accident. Yet, here I am 4 years later, sharing my own journey and those of others in the most heartwarming and joyful way. Each and every one of my guests share their own beautiful insights and their strategies for getting through their grief. And through these stories, I hope you'll find your own way to deal with your grief in whatever form that may take. I'll pop my guest links and any free resources in the episode notes, along with my website address if you'd like to know more about the energy work I do, as that was my lifesaver in my own grief journey. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you can keep informed of each weekly episode. So now let's see who our guest is this week. On this episode, we have someone really special lined up for you. Myree Morsi is a soul guide and transformational therapist who, since 1999, has supported people who are navigating their awakening, healing, soul alignment, and spiritual journeys. She carries seasoned expertise as a licensed therapist, conflict resolution and trauma specialist, innately gifted spiritual seer and healer, and leadership and self-development coach. Quite the package happening there. Recognized for her unique approach to teaching and healing that perfectly balances the tangible and the mystical, Myree has guided thousands of students and clients through the most painful and expansive transformations of their lives with somatic, shamanic, and yogic therapies. After successfully healing her own PTSD from childhood abuse, then guiding her own spontaneous Kundalini awakening to completion in 2009, Myree is dedicated to helping others heal their trauma, claim their spiritual gifts, elevate as soulful leaders, and stabilize and befriend their awakening experiences in the midst of modern pressurized lives. She has walked a deep and transformative journey with grief from the tragic and horrific loss of her younger brother in 2013. The power of grief led her to access Causeless Joy, and it has remained with her ever since. So now feels like the perfect timing for me to be speaking to Myree, as I've recently felt that I've stepped into my own causeless joy, and it's the best feeling ever and a truly wonderful way to be living. So we're going to be talking about that and so much more. I'm excited for you to be here and listening, because I'm sharing these journeys with you. And I feel Myree is going to share so much invaluable information with us. So, as always, I wish your journey to be filled with love, happiness, and hope. So let's do this. In this episode, we're discussing suicide with some graphic components which may be triggering for you. So listener discretion is advised. If you feel this has affected you or stirred up emotions and you feel you need some support, please contact or Google your local or national suicide helplines or crisis prevention support, or reach out to someone, anyone. Please don't be alone during this time. So, Myree, absolutely wonderful to have you as my guest today.
I am really joyous and grateful to be here and to be in the big, deep heart space that you hold for these interviews.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm just going to jump right in, boots and all, and help our listeners understand what Causeless Joy is all about.
So Causeless Joy, before I started to have my experience of it, and it's more than an experience, and we can talk about that. It was something I read about in books, and it's really spoken about most often from the Buddhist teachers. And it's a causeless joy, meaning it has no root cause in your life. It's not dependent on your relationship, the money in your bank account, if you ate or not today, although that's always helpful. It's not dependent on anything that you attach to or think is important. It's a kind of joy that rises from the innate gift of living, and then even deeper than that, your ability to rest into and be a space for your deepest nature, whatever you want to call that, to flow through you. And it's like almost you are the fountain that the fountain bubbles through. And you might call that God or Jesus or the divine or quantum field or Mother Nature or Gaia. You can call that whatever you like, love, but it's like the deepest intersection. And in my experience, there's this way that grief, if you meet it and work with it, can take you to that intersection and then deposit you there and leave you there. And the thing about Causeless Joy is that it's not a joy that comes and goes on the basis of like a season or the mood of your day. It's something that becomes realized would be the word. It's a realized experience, and that you are realizing that that is the true foundation, or that's your true nature. Your true nature is that kind of causeless, free joy. And because of that, it's like you become rooted in that deeper sense of who you are. And to have that experience, it sounds like, for me, when I was reading about that in a book, well, that sounds nice. And I hope that happens to me one day. And maybe I can do something to make that happen to me someday. And at the same time, for anyone listening to this podcast, is also alive in you in this moment, whether you are in the deepest grief or helping people through the deepest grief or whatever brought you to this podcast today. And my hope is that this conversation that Helen and I have can be a transmission of that joy, can fertilize the seeds of that joy, can touch it so that on this day or someday in the future, you may cross the path of that moment and recognize it.
That is a beautiful explanation. And I think it just goes right to the core of who we are. And often we're so busy looking outward that we actually forget to look inward and see how beautiful and perfect we are as each individual. And then once we start to understand that and embrace that, I think that's when we just open up this fountain for experiencing the most wonderful things. And I know that you mentioned that you came by your causeless joy through loss, and it was a loss of your beautiful brother. And I'm so sorry that happened. But are you able to share with us what that was like for you and then how that led you onto this path?
Yeah. So my younger brother, he was 6 foot something. I'm short. Anyone who knows, I'm like Kylie Minogue height. I'm 5'2" and a bit. And I am a brunette, and my brother was 6'3" or something, big, tall, redheaded, covered in so many freckles it looked like a suntan. We used to laugh about that. And he was my little brother. And so because we had a very difficult childhood, it was very tumultuous. There was a lot of loss and trauma and unpredictability due to a lot of circumstances that were beyond my family's control. My father had a workplace accident that then became schizophrenia very quickly and was deeply destabilizing. And so because of that, I was extremely protective of him and would often put myself in front of him to protect him. So I had this big part of our relationship. And then when he was, I think he would have had complex trauma that was never really kind of diagnosed and problematic. And then in his late teens and early 20s, he fell into depression. I think when he was 20, he had his first psychotic episode and had schizophrenia and developed schizophrenia, and then lived with that for 20 years, which his schizophrenia was very deep and at times extremely difficult. And I don't know that I could have lived with it for the 20 years that he did, but eventually his medication lost efficacy and his voices got very bad. And there was a particular occasion, unfortunately, when his voices won and convinced him to take his life in a way. I mean, I won't speak about what it is. I want to protect the listeners, but it was
Sure.
profoundly horrific and public and wild, and the kind of death you would never wish on your worst enemy. And at the time that it happened, I was up in the mountains actually doing a retreat, and I was in a meeting and I saw my auntie's phone number flashing, and I thought, that's my brother. That'll be about him. I just knew. And a few days before, I'd been waking up at night in this kind of sense of fright, but not knowing what it was. And so that loss, it was a very complex grief for me, because it was obviously the grief and the loss, but it was also highly traumatic death. And which anyone who's been through that, you engage with a whole lot of experiences you never imagined, including telling your own mother that their child has passed, and the many things you wish you had never have to do. And then as a testament to the intensity of the shock, my body, I was 41 at the time, but my body went into instant menopause. I don't know if there's any ladies here know about instant menopause. It's when a woman's system gets such an enormous shock that the ovaries stop functioning in an estrogenic kind of way. And so all of a sudden I had 3 massive griefs going on at once. I had grief response. I had a trauma process. I had a menopause instant hardcore 50 hot flashes a day. And I had the grief of all of that at once. And so I was really lost, I would say, for the rest. That happened in May, 30th of May, 31st of May. And then the rest of that year, I was just deep in grief. And the first month or so, I was just in the most profound shock and just walking along the ocean, just letting the ocean, giving it to the ocean. And for me also, because I'm a seer and psychic, I could see a lot clairvoyantly. I could see my brother's journey. So I was kind of tracking that and supporting him with healing and prayer for his travels beyond this life. And I'll circle back to this later, but it was a very big year. And then I got to January and I moved into this little mud brick cottage in this really sweet part of Australia. But I was still, I was haunted by what my brother did. And I was haunted by the way he died and all those questions you have. And you would know this. Did they suffer very much? What were they thinking when that happened? And just trying to imagine it. And when someone dies of their own hand in a very powerful way that you couldn't do, it's even more impactful, right? Because I couldn't do what he did. I'm just like, no, I just don't have that in me to do that. And I went and I put my name down. One of my mentors, he had an extremely long wait list for a 30-minute session. And one day I got this email and it said, a space has come up. And this never doesn't happen really almost at all. Would you like a session with this mentor? And I was like, yes. Wow. And this was my miracle. And he's a kind of genius. And he asked me what happened and the way my brother died involved fire. And he made a kind of joke about that, which he only could do because he was so finely tuned to it. But he asked me, he said to me, I told him how I was haunted, and he said, I think you have to be willing to die in the same way. You can understand. Yeah, no. He gauged my strength and my capacity, and he said, I think you need to, because you're haunted by it, you have to be willing to die in the same way. So I lay down on the floor with my mobile phone on my ear, and I closed my eyes, and I imagined myself on fire and burning up and I just lay there imagining and experiencing that. And there was this, at some point in time, I felt like what was on fire was my personal history. It wasn't just me in that moment, but my whole life was on fire. All of my experiences, everything that had remained of my identity from my awakening, pain and suffering and obsessive thoughts about everything was just on fire. And I suddenly realized that this was freedom, that this willingness to let everything die was this doorway to what I was really seeking, and that his death inadvertently was giving me that, not that I would ever ask that. And I just continued to let myself burn. And there was this moment where I just felt I was falling and falling and falling and falling, kind of like into the earth. And the mentor's just there on the end of the phone. And then there was this point where I hit the bottom of wherever I fell. And it was like at that moment, at that juncture point, I hit the place where the deepest pain meets the deepest compassion. It's the only way I can describe it. It's where the only way you can meet that level of pain is with absolute surrender. And in that absolute surrender is infinite compassion, infinite love. And I feel like I've never left that point. I feel like I still exist there at that intersection. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful that I never leave. And I know I'll never leave.
That's such a, that's such a profound thing for you to experience, because here you are, not expecting to probably end up at that point. And then to be able to share so much through this session, and that willingness to actually allow yourself to go there is testament to your own strength and your own awareness. Yeah. Wow. That is absolutely incredible. But let's go back a step, because I know from your childhood and just sort of reading about you that you've had this clairvoyance activated, and it's a natural, you describe it as a natural shamanic connection with nature. So you see other people's auras and the movement of pain energies through systems. Tell us about that and what it was like for you as a child with these gifts.
Yeah, so as a child, because myself and my brother and then me on my own ended up at a young age, I think around 3, 4, living with my grandparents who lived out of town on a farm in, a really quiet part of the world. Not a lot goes on down there. And I was just given range because my grandparents were busy, running a farm, raising their own children. And I just used to run wild. And in that sort of freedom that I had, I would see very naturally the energies of nature and of other humans around me. And it's like I knew how to see in that way, that I had seen in this way before. And it just felt like I was picking up an expertise that I crafted somewhere else. And it was really beautiful for me. In some ways, it saved my life because it gave me other reference points to humans, because a lot of the humans in my life were painful humans, all going through their own immense pain and doing their very best, and beautiful people and busy people. And it gave me this way of seeing the light and the love that is behind, that is the force of life in a way. That's the force of life that's inside a rock and a tree and in the grass and emanating. And so
how does that look? How does you talk about seeing the energy and things? Is it something you feel, or do you physically see it, or what does that look like?
Great questions. So it depends on what I'm looking at, and it's often all of those things at once. So if I look at your aura right now, I'll just do it momentarily, right? But there's your halo is, especially the top part of your halo is filled with light, right? Right now, because you're talking about something that moves you and fills you with a lot of love and joy. And you've also, like the top of your crown upwards, this very strong sort of column of consciousness and light. And then it comes straight down into your heart, which tells me that you have a very strong connection to things beyond yourself, right? That your sense of who you are and what is meaningful. And I don't know anything about Helen apart from a little chat at the start of today, but that what informs Helen is connected to beyond herself. And as we talk about it, like her whole aura starts lighting up. So there's this, our aura is constantly telling a story. And that story is, the aura doesn't lie, and unless you're some kind of magician who can kind of hide things in your aura. But for most of us, your aura is like a television screen that's telling the whole story on many different levels of who you are and what you're experiencing, and reflecting your beauty and your power and your pain and your suffering and if you're open to it, your many, many lives. And I love the aura because it's also our biggest healing tool, because we're more energy than matter. Like that's physics, right?
Yes.
Physics and chemistry. Like we have these huge atoms, mostly space, mostly energy, tiny little particles. And so our whole being is more energy and space than it is matter. And so our capacity to heal ourselves through energy and energetic change is so massive, because we are primarily energy.
Wow. Shall I share something with you?
I'd try to.
Because just prior to connecting with you, what I did was I opened up my crown chakra and brought in the divine white light and connected it down through my heart, so that I would be really open and receptive to what you were sharing today. And you just described exactly what I did to a T.
That is amazing. So there you go, everyone, that our intention, our calling in and our meditation, it's real and it's potent and powerful, and it changes us. And so what Helen's done is having an effect on me, right? She's affecting and holding space for me to show up. And that's amazing. Thanks for sharing.
I know. Because it's so important for me to be able to have your messages go out wide and resonate with the people they need to, that I feel like I need to call on some extra help to do that, so that I can be guided to ask the right questions, and so that you're sharing them. Because, I feel people getting so stuck and trapped in their grief, and it really breaks my heart when I read about that. And for so many people, their grief journey can be so dark and terrifying and directionless. And I think what you described with your own abilities allowed you to transcend that, like you experienced that to the nth degree, that you actually were able to transcend that and be able to take yourself to another place, another level of awareness, and to reach that space that you have. And this is what I would love for people who have gone through particularly any grief, but particularly any really traumatic grief experiences, to understand that there can very much be light at the end of the tunnel, that we need to trust this experience and this journey we're on.
Yeah, I think that I've kind of had many different griefs. My father died at 7, my beloved grandmother at 12, a friend a few years ago, like in many different ways and many forms of grief. But my brother was the big one, and it was so heavy, and I was a little bit naive. I remember in the days after he died having this very arrogant thought, Helen.
We can have that.
Had a very arrogant thought that I'm a therapist. I can do this. I'll be able to do this better than other people because I'm a therapist, right? And I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I think despite everything that I ever experienced, I think I had never known such weightedness and such heaviness as grief can bring to people. And I didn't know that was possible. And I often, as I came out the other, you want to get out of it, right? You want it to end. You just like, can this just effing thing just finish at that point in time, because I can't cope with it. And I think I just threw everything I had at it. Spiritual practice. I did so much therapy. Everything. And I think that grief is also not just our process. My sense is that grief is having its own process with us. And that grief often I think of as having a very big mouth, and it picks us up and it puts us inside its jaws and presses firmly, and it doesn't let go till it's ready, until it's deemed that we have met what we need to meet, and what we have found, the things we have we need to find, because I think death is a doorway to whatever is next. It's not just a loss and a horror and a hell of a thing that you wish you never had to experience. But underneath death and grief and loss, something's being born in the dark and the fallow and the cold, dark fields and the dark water and the dark skies. Something is germinating that wouldn't germinate without that kind of the heat of that kind of fire. And in Australia, we have these plants, and they only germinate when they've been burnt and died. And the heat of the fire and the way it activates the seed inside. And somehow I think grief is similar, right? If we can work with it, cry with it, yeah, that the fire, it's a fire, and that fire will activate the seed of what is to come beyond the grief, beyond the beyond. You can't even imagine that beyond ever happening. And that grief will be a speck and then 2 specks. And some people's grief takes a long time for those seeds to water, and other people's grief, like mine, had a miraculous shift. But I still grieved. I still the grief went on in different layers for quite a long time till I really felt fully complete and free.
Yeah. But you see, it took until your brother's death to truly take you on that transformative journey.
Yeah.
And you experienced other grief that was probably preparing you for that path forward. And that's so important to understand. And I love that you shared that you didn't have the tools despite all your wonderful abilities and experiences and like that we need to reach out. We need to get a good tribe of people and support around us, that we can't always do it alone. The other thing I really love that you just shared is about opening that door. Grief is that door that opens. And I remember for myself having this moment that was so cathartic. It was like, okay, that is it. The worst possible thing has happened to me, so bring it on. I really don't care. And I say care, but I don't care. But I use that expression. I don't care what anybody does to me anymore, what they think about me, what I do. I'm just going to live my life from this point forward the way I want to. And that was my door opening. Because prior to that, I've been very much a people person, people pleaser. Sorry, not people person, people pleaser. And I'd lived my whole life denying who I really was. And it took that event as a very, very big wake-up call for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the freedom, so that's your fire, and your fire burns away everything that was unimportant and left you with what was.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have these wonderful combination of gifts that you use to help people find their way out of the confusion and the fog to finding their path. Spiritual mentorship, counseling, energy healing with intuitive, clairsentience, and clairvoyant gifts. What is the most helpful that you've found, or is it a combination of all these, for helping people who are struggling and are stuck in that deep, dark grief, to be able to find their way to that door, to be able to open it?
I think it's a combination of those things, and I'll share some things that I might do with someone who's gone through some kind of grief. The first part is just kind of mapping what grief is with someone, right? The nuts and the bolts, and helping them to realize that what's happening to them is, this is the way grief works, right? Yours might be different to someone else's, but there's like a naturalness to grief. It's not an alien process. It's human. And I think once you've been out the other side, it's easier to recognize the different places grief takes you. And then there can be the trauma component, like helping someone. This is very important. And I do this both very strongly energetically. So there are energetic ways and tools. And anyone who has some kind of faith or connection to spirit or Jesus or God or the earth. You can call on whatever helps. But in my work, I'm also a spiritual and energetic healer. So I work with spirit, a huge spirit team. And I work with that spirit team to help a person's physical body and that nervous system, energetic system, and brain to come out of the shock state. And the shock state, because the shock shuts down the body's ability to heal, right? And it freezes us in one way or many, many different ways. And so one of the things that we will do is move the shock in layers. I call it trauma reversal. It's like reversing the trauma out of someone's physical and energetic system. And if you're sitting here somewhere or driving your car, maybe not driving your car, but you're somewhere where it's safe, that you can even pause this recording and you can call on whatever sings for you, whatever is meaningful, and ask it to help release shock from your body. You can ask your spirit, human angels and guides to help soften, dissolve, release, lift up out of you. That's often what it feels like. It feels like the shock is like lifting up out of the body and out of the auric field, or you can imagine it draining into the earth. And while might sound like a simple thing that I'm talking about, it is profound, because then you can start to heal. And then the nervous system can start to regulate. And regulate means digest, right? When you start to release the shock, your nervous system can begin to recover and be the thing that digests your experiences. Because a lot of the times when we get stuck is because we're stuck in the shock, and the way the trauma is kind of frozen in the system. So that's one thing that I would suggest on that kind of like nervous system, physiological, energetic healing. And then the other thing is I really work with people. As soon as that phase is over, I work with them to befriend the grief in a way. Doesn't mean you like the grief, right? Mm. But do you recognize the grief is having a role in your life, and that you can have a relationship with it. And sometimes we'll draw it or paint it or dance it. Sometimes we might imagine what grief is asking of us. And sometimes we have to float right up above the earth and look at grief from a long way away. And sometimes grief is a very big thing and we need a lot of distance. And if we just imagine we have a long distance from the grief, it allows us to kind of play with it and relate to it. And the other thing that I do when I'm working with someone going through any form of grief is I'm always looking for the way they're growing in their grief. I'm always looking for the way a new strength is showing up, or an insight is coming up, or healing is happening, or the signs of recovery, or because we can't see them when we're grieving. And it's, for me, it's very important to help reflect and not necessarily celebrate like I'm going to get the pom-poms out, but just celebrate by noticing and appreciating that person of the way they're moving through the grief process and tracking it, because that gives us hope that that it will end and you will come out the other side of this process. And even because there is a period of the grief when you will not feel like it has an end. And that's just that phase, and that's really normal. The other thing that I think is really important when I'm working with someone going through grief is to sit in the dark with them and not sit in the darkness of...
Literally sit in the dark. Like,
not necessarily with the lights off, but I mean in the dark places. To go into those dark places and be there with them, inside them, beside them. And I think, as you probably know too, the thing when my brother died, you know how you said you didn't care anymore?
Yeah.
The thing that changed for me was I had experienced and overcome so much pain, but the thing that happened after that was that I am no longer afraid of pain. There is no pain that anyone can present to me that I move from.
Yes.
Because I'm still at that juncture point between deep compassion and deep pain. And I feel that for me is the greatest freedom of my life, and that I don't have to shirk or move. I can say yes and be with any horrible, horrible thing. And
It's like letting go of the fear, isn't it? We
Yeah.
live so much of our lives immersed with some fear of some description, whether it's a small thing or a large thing, that quite often we don't realize how much of our lives are wrapped around in fear.
Yeah.
And when you don't have that fear, like for me, I could die tomorrow and I would be happy. I would be happy where my life is now, how I'm living now, how I'm stepping up now. I would be happy. So if my time is tomorrow, okay, I'm not afraid of that.
Yeah, and I was watching you as you talk about that. You're not speaking that from your head.
No.
You're speaking that from a very, very deep place that got carved out in you.
Yeah. And I had to find that place because this is something I don't often share with listeners, but my heart was cut off. I was totally 100% in my head. I didn't let my heart feel at all. And so my journey has been to opening my heart up, to allowing myself to feel, to allowing myself to be vulnerable, to allowing myself to experience life from a heart-centered place rather than in my mind. And for me,
how did you do that? Did you just keep bringing yourself back to that?
Gratitude, I would say, would be the biggest thing. What I did was especially in those early months and years, I kept thinking, what am I grateful for? And I lost her when she was 18 and a half. So I kept saying, but at least I'm grateful that I had 18 years. And within those 18 years, I had all of this. And I got to experience so much and I got to grow from her. And so I just kept going back. What am I grateful for? And even every single day, if I was finding it hard to be grateful for something, I'm grateful for having a nice, comfy bed to sleep in, for being able to get up and have a shower when there are people around the world who have no access to water. I would take it back to the tiniest things that you can be grateful for. And I think the more I started to live with gratitude, the more that my heart started to feel. It started to hurt, started to feel. So, and I just allowed it to do that because I knew it was a good thing.
You know, I had tears in my corner of my eyes when you're talking about that because that's not gratitude. That's an act of power. That is one phenomenal act of power every day to bow on the mat, like the prayer mat, to gratitude. Wow, you're a powerful lady.
Never thought of it like that.
Oh yeah, to bring yourself to that mat and to bow at that mat to your altar of gratitude. Oh, that is why you're who you are now. My goodness.
Well, let's talk about heart opening now.
Yeah.
We've just addressed it. So, you know, like I've just mentioned, that's been truly a blessing for me. Now, I'd love to hear your perspective on heart opening, profound heart opening.
Yeah. So we are designed, it's interesting, I was just listening to someone talking about this when I was driving home for this interview, that we're designed to have open hearts as human creatures, as human beings. We have a physical organ of our heart, which we know is so powerful and has been proven by science to be thousands of times more powerful than our brain. But we also have an energetic heart. So right in the center of the sternum, there is a chakra and an energy vortex, which goes out the front and out the back of the body. And we have many of these vortexes. And as full and eventually awakened beings, that heart center is meant to be open. Now, it doesn't have to be always open because it's fluid and responsive to our circumstances, but we're designed, and the Tibetans know about this, right? It's a very big part of Tibetan practice, that energy is meant to be flowing out of our heart chakra all the time, right? That's how we're healthy. And most of us grow up and we armor our heart. We squeeze it closed because we've had traumas or people have shamed us and criticized us or misunderstood us or judged us or labeled us in some way. And so our heart becomes anxious and pressurized and shut. And at some point in time, if we're blessed, and sometimes it's from very painful experiences, that heart center begins to open. And anyone who's going through a spiritual awakening experience knows this, that energy rises through the body. You can call that Kundalini energy or Shakti or life force. And it can happen without that source itself. But energy will start to push open that heart center. And as it opens, the first thing you're going to experience is grief and pain. It's like when a pipe has been blocked by crud. When it first frees up, the crud flows out, the rust and the rubbish. And so when our heart starts to open, the first thing we often notice, and some people get a bit edgy here, is it hurts, right? It's then grief. We have tears. But there's something different about the grief and the pain when the heart opens, because underneath it, there's a sweetness. Underneath it, there's like a kind of raw beauty. Yeah. Because that's the raw wonder and power of our hearts starting to be freed. And as that goes on, there are often moments when you have what's called a profound heart awakening. That can be that in a moment or a small period of time, the heart suddenly has a massive expansion, a massive kind of energetic shift. And looking at it clairvoyantly, it's almost like the whole front of the chest opens outward. It almost like you imagine huge doorways that just open to the universe and go, yes. And in that moment, you can have a profound ecstasy or an immense love for everything that's ever been, ever was, and ever will be. You can feel connected and one with the universe. It can also be, for some people, extremely painful, because in that one sort of small moment or instant, a whole lot of pain purges out like a tidal wave. And I always encourage people to just stay with it. Like, don't move from it. Don't move away from the heart opening. Just let it happen. The heart knows what it needs to do. And just allow it and have the tears, feel the sort of sweetness and the bittersweetness and most of all, rest, like allow yourself to be with the rawness that's underneath it all, because that is the new ground. That is the new ground of the rest of your life. And once you've had a profound heart awakening, you're changed, right? Yeah. There's a consciousness, an organic consciousness that activates in your heart, but it activates through all of the power energy centers of your body, and it changes your brain and your midbrain. And it changes, therefore, your personality in a way. You can have a personality or an identity shift, or suddenly you don't want to do a whole lot of things you thought were really important anymore, or you get a sense of calling or mission, or it's just like, so for many people, it's just like, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. That I'm an okay being, right? The critic can fall away, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And I sense that grief and the way it rocks us is a calling card. It invites us to that profound heart awakening. It keeps taking us to that doorway and saying, what do you think? Yeah. What do you think? So we open it a tiny crack, and then the next day, another crack. And I always say to people, just sit with the crack. Let the wind whistle through the crack, because that's going to eventually, over time, keep making it get bigger. And whatever size your heart awakening is, thank you for your courage. Wherever you are.
So beautiful. And do you know what I really noticed was that I went back to my old hometown area, and I was catching up with everybody, my friends and family down there, and also colleagues and that. And every single place I went, it was like I was putting out this amazing energy that was just attracting and inviting people into it, and on a level that they had never experienced me before, because I used to be quite closed off. I would only let people know me to a certain degree. They never, only my closest friends knew the crazy zany part of me. Everybody else got the filtered version. But this time it was just like incredible. And I was blown away. I was blown away by it all. And it was just the most beautiful experience. And so anybody listening, I recommend exactly what Myree said. Just allow your heart to open up at least a little chink to begin with, and then a little bit more. Because what you get at the end of it, it's so beautiful, so amazing, so special.
Yeah. Yeah, because grief hollows you out to hold so much more love. I remember something Ram Dass said. I don't know if you know this story about Ram Dass, and there was a couple that I think they were from Seattle, and their beautiful teenage daughter was murdered. And they wrote to Ram Dass, who's a spiritual teacher who's passed away, I think last year, but they wrote a letter to him about what happened. And he wrote back, and you can read it, you can hear this story, I think, in one of his, one of the Ram Dass movies. He talks about this, but he says to them, no matter what happens, no matter how painful it is, keep your heart open. Keep keeping your heart open and allow that to be a practice. And I'd had another spiritual teacher tell me that too. And I remember when I was walking through the ICU doors into the intensive care unit, I remembered that statement, and I saw myself reflected in the mirror glass of the ICU staff section. And I thought, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to do that, because I have no idea what else to do. And yeah, I think that's what also kind of led me to that moment I described earlier, was that it was horrible, and I kept on trying to find a way to keep my heart open to it, even when I felt completely demolished by it. And I wanted to share this too for anyone who feels like, is it going to end? That there was this period of time before that kind of miraculous shift that happened for me, where I was obsessed with detective movies and shows, and I would watch them endlessly. And there was one in particular, an English one, which you would know, DL and Pasco. And I made my partner go and get every DL and Pasco DVD he could get from the library, poor fellow. And I would watch them, and I asked myself, why am I watching all these DVDs of this cop show that's old, and I would never normally do this. And I realized it was because on those movies and on those cop shows, there was always an end and a resolution. And I just didn't feel like I was ever going to have one. And it was like, for me, watching those detective series that every single episode had a resolution, it's like it gave me a tiny experience of the thing I didn't know I was ever going to get. Yeah.
I can so relate to that. My sister introduced me to a Turkish drama series called EK, and it's subtitled. And we just got hooked on it because it was nice and easy and heartfelt and fun. And there was there was drama in it, but not anything really bad or horrific or unkind or anything like that. And I think that helped me open my heart, because I used to sit there and just go, oh, I really love this. I really just love watching this Turkish drama. And each episode would go for 2 hours. And I remember sometimes binge watching it because, I didn't want to put my head in another space. And so that's what I did. Oh my gosh. Now there's something else really exciting I want to touch on before we finish, is that you today shared with me that you've been to an incredible meeting. Let's share our listeners about that, because this is really heartwarming.
So I'm involved at the moment, and for those of you listening in the future, it's the 9th of September we're recording, and Kabul and Afghanistan have just fallen under Taliban rule, which has placed millions of people in basically post-traumatic stress. And at the moment I'm involved in we're seeing if we can help some refugees. And I went to the Migrant Resource Center. I drove into the city, and there was a beautiful young man there who was once a refugee from Afghanistan. And I actually got the time was changed. So I was there at the wrong time, but I was there at the right time to meet this beautiful man from Afghanistan. And he asked me why I was here, and I said, this is what I'm doing for these refugees. And we sat in this room together, and we talked about Afghanistan and what was happening, and his story, and these people's story that I'm supporting. And we wept. And we wept for his journey, for the people I'm with journey. And we wept. We just could, because we had both been through such deep grief, we could sit in such comfort and weep together without any shame. And just, it was a very deep and touching and meaningful experience that is only possible because of what I have experienced and what he has experienced. And I think that it allowed that I can sit with the pain of Afghanistan. Like, I don't know what that's like. I don't live there, but I'm not afraid to meet it. And so that I think I think that is one of the things that we become good companions.
I could feel that. That. And it was like a beautiful grief.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the beautiful grief. The grief is also beautiful. We don't talk about that it is beautiful. And let me try and see if I can even name why it's beautiful. I think because when we can be with grief in that way, it's like it touches us together in the same place, in the same way, at the same time, in a shared experience that also connects us to the thing beyond us that we are at the same time.
And I think it's like you said earlier, it's about leading us to that door. And behind that door can be something incredibly special that we could never even envisage in our life. So yeah, it's very, very special. So I'm going to wrap it up now. And I always finish with this question. So what is the best thing that's happened to you either today or this week? And I suspect you're going to say it's probably your meeting, but hey, this is your question. You answer it how you would like.
I would say the best thing that's happened to me in the last week is the opportunity to give back to the people of Afghanistan and to serve a very small number of people in the best way I can possible, and to be willing to fight for them. And people keep thanking me for it, but I keep looking at them and say, why are you thanking me? Because I am getting as much from doing this.
Yeah. When you serve others, that's it. That's what people don't get. And when you give yourself without any expectations, you get the most wonderful rewards back.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that you're serving that. When you're having a moment when life gets overwhelming, too much to bear, turns to custard, what's your go-to to pivot yourself back out of it?
I always go to my spirit team, and I say to them, help me, friends, help me move this energy, soften this emotion, clear this energy, clear this shock, show me the way, give me a tip. What one thing could I do next to make this easier or better? Will this end? If you could follow me around with it and listen to my internal dialogue, I'm talking to my spirit team all the time, but never more so than when life is difficult and uncertain.
Brilliant. And what would you like to leave our listeners with? What takeaways?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. I would say that you are in a big, organic, sometimes horrible process that is also a profound and divine and spiritual power that is going to make something meaningful of what might seem the most meaningless experience of losing someone, right? And that you can find your way, and your way is going to be different to everyone else's, but there will be breadcrumbs and doorknobs, and keep looking for them and reaching out. And if you can't find them, find people that can see them for you and keep pointing you towards them until your eyes adjust to the light and you can see your own way.
Wow. Myree, I just have to say from the bottom of my heart that this has just been an incredible conversation with you.
No.
And I hope that our listeners feel like, you just had me tearing up so often throughout our conversation and they were tears of joy and tears of grief. And this truly has been a beautiful experience for me to be speaking with you and connecting with you. Thank you.
I've loved every moment of it. Thank you so much, Helen. And I send my love and blessings, and I hope that there is some medicine in this for anyone who's listening.
Now, we're going to put your links in the episode notes that you sent through to me, but is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners if they would like to sort of take a closer look at what you do?
Yeah. So come visit me on my website. The links will be below in the show notes, myree.com, www.myree.com.au. I've always had things going on. I'm a big creative generator person. So I have, for anyone who's interested in healing themselves with spirit or being their own healer, at the end of October, and this might be after this podcast comes out, but I'll let you know anyway, because it'll happen again the following year. I teach a program that healing tools for humanity. So how you can energetically and spiritually and emotionally heal yourself. So I teach a program so that you learn to heal yourself and you can heal others. And I also teach people to be leaders, but that's the big thing that's coming up. There's also a lot of free things on my website. There's a free ebook, there's free classes, there's free meditations. If you sign up to my newsletter, I'm always sending things out for you. I have free classes and master classes, all sorts of things, because I want you to blossom and to heal and to find your breadcrumbs and doorknobs and doorways and ways out. And that's why I'm here. I feel like I'm only here. Like, the only reason I'm here now is to serve.
Yeah, I so get that. And beautiful office, beautiful. So I recommend, if you're listening now, do that. Go and have a look at the show notes. Go over to Myree's website and check this out and see what's right for you. You won't regret it. Trust me on this. You won't regret it. Oh, again, Myree, my thanks, my heartfelt thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode today, be sure to share it with others. Hit the subscribe or like button so you can be notified of each weekly episode. Also, let me know how I'm doing, especially if there's more you'd like to know that perhaps we didn't get time to touch on today or in past episodes. And if you're after resources to help you out on this journey, or more about the energy healing work I do, hit the Healing to Be You link. That's the word healing, 2, letter B, letter U.com. So until next time, be kind to you, and thank you for joining us on the beautiful side of grief.